Very good morning.
You could take off your mask.
Very good morning and welcome to an event on forest and people. How can REDD Plus support indigenous and local forest communities and what we have learned so far? First of all, I would like to thank the event panelists and affiliates, the UK government and event collaborators, including UN REDD, KFW, and World Bank teams, and others who are involved in organizing this event and inviting me to join this very important event. We are all aware the impact of climate change, and we, all the global community, really hope that COP26 negotiation succeed in the effort to keep global temperature 1.5 degrees. The momentum around finding viable, cost-effective approaches to mitigate climate change. We know that the REDD Plus, as designed in Cancun, is mitigation and forestry. We also know REDD Plus has been slowly moving onto the global stage for the past 15 years. This has seen a trajectory of up and down. However, as an approach and given the important role of forests, not only as carbon sinks, but also the home of mega biodiversity, where genetic resources are there, and that's important for current and future generation. The forests also provide cultural values that many indigenous people gave many local wisdom. In current and previous work involved in REDD Plus process, in negotiation at the international process and implementation in my country, also involvement as the chair of the Recognition Board. I also learned about the progress of REDD Plus in the region. From the lesson that we learn, working in the region, involved in the global level, one similarity is the acknowledgement how important is the role of indigenous people in REDD Plus. They are not only important to be engaged, but also how they become a partner in decision-making process. What we learn from our region with the diversity of arrangement of indigenous people, one thing that recognition becomes stronger and stronger. Indigenous people and local communities are the players and the guardians of the forest. They provide indigenous knowledge that's very useful for even modern community. We know that indigenous people also face many challenges. Indigenous people and local community. This is also about their capacity that we have to take care to continue building those capacities, and also the recognition of the right. We know every country have different arrangement about the right of the indigenous people and local community, but one thing that common recognition of the role and the right, and how each country could the best possible to address that right and needs, also their challenge. That's the huge challenge that we are facing. And that's many areas that we need to address. And this is why this event is very important. I look forward that this event is fruitful, and also we are together hoping that the negotiation here also fruitful, could agree on the pending issues that we have so far. At last, before the panel discussion, I would like to draw your attention to the two videos showcasing the work and impact of the two UK International Climate Finance supported REDD Plus activities. First, the World Bank FCPF Capacity Building Program, and second, KFW REDD Early Movers Program in Agri. Thank you and enjoy the videos.
Fortalecer el intercambio entre los gobiernos y la sociedad civil y los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales, para diseñar juntos un instrumento que le llamamos Estrategia Nacional de Prevención de la Deforestación. Se le llama REDD, que es reducir emisiones por deforestación y por degradación forestal.
Facilitar todos estos procesos de diálogo y acercamiento para poderles crear capacidades en torno a todo el tema de REDD, desde una óptica y recogiendo toda la dinámica cultural de nuestros grupos. No es llegar con un lenguaje técnico, ni implica llegar a hablar con palabras que nadie va a entender.
Entonces darle esa herramienta de que conozca para que pueda participar de una manera más objetiva en los espacios de participación.
Y crear una serie de materiales y enfocar las capacitaciones hacia el lenguaje que ellos necesitan escuchar.
Entonces son talleres, son eventos, son cursos, son muchos, entre ellos mucho intercambio, le llamamos sur-sur, entre comunidades, entre países forestales.
Muchas comunidades no tenían ni siquiera el conocimiento de qué significa REDD, pero en realidad en el país se está iniciando a discutir la estrategia de REDD+.
Y entonces, para que ellos puedan participar con los gobiernos, necesitan entender el tema. Esto es el programa de fortalecimiento de capacidades.
Iniciamos capacitando a jóvenes para luego empezar con el tema de medición de carbono. Enseñarle a los jóvenes a medir los árboles, altura, diámetro.
Que tengan también conocimientos científicos, a pesar de no contar con un título, también de cómo dar el monitoreo al bosque en cuanto a la situación de deforestación, invasiones.
El tema de conservación no es nuevo para ellos. El tema del manejo forestal comunitario no es nuevo para ellos. Lo que estamos haciendo es tratando de que estos grupos, en lo que hacen, formalicen un poquito más la forma como lo están haciendo y también generen cierta capacidad administrativa y para rendir cuentas.
Y ya tenemos 47 estrategias nacionales redes en África, Asia y Latinoamérica. Aquí hay 17. En Latinoamérica están a punto de graduarse 7 países que han estado preparando su estrategia nacional, y esa estrategia nacional incluye la transferencia de bonos o créditos de carbono.
Poder llegar fondos específicamente a las comunidades también ha sido un reto y ha llegado.
Tratamos de crear las capacidades a los grupos de base comunitaria para que puedan ejecutar por sí mismos los recursos, y lo que estamos apostándoles es a ellos a que puedan ser dueños de su proyecto. Y esta gente realmente ha puesto alma, cuerpo, corazón para tener sus bosques en pie, aprovecharlo de una manera sostenible, y eso merece una recompensa.
Ahora, hay un balance, porque el ser humano necesita seguir comiendo, necesita alimentos. ¿Qué tanto producir? ¿Qué tanto conservar? Y ese es el reto, y por eso necesitamos que los gobiernos se acompañen de los actores locales, de las comunidades locales, de los pueblos indígenas.
O Acre foi o primeiro no Brasil a criar a Lei de Incentivos aos Serviços Ambientais, o CISA, que viabiliza uma série de políticas ambientais. A iniciativa atraiu investimentos da Alemanha e Reino Unido para a conservação de nossas florestas por meio do programa REM Acre Fase 2. Em Cruzeiro do Sul, a comunidade do Rio Croa é uma das beneficiadas com o projeto Turismo Comunitário.
Para nós que é muito importante, porque a gente não vai precisar de matar a mata e tal, assim, porque nós estamos preservando, né? Para preservar tem que ter, o programa vai chegar em boa hora para nós, para ajudar nós, todo mundo mesmo, assim, para isso, para nós não desmatar e trabalhar na nossa área mesmo, que pertencer para nós não mexer na floresta, para deixar como está.
O REM também apoia as famílias extrativistas com o pagamento do subsídio da borracha e murmuru. 145 indígenas foram beneficiados com o pagamento de bolsas para a formação de agentes agroflorestais.
Então precisa ter continuidade nesse apoio, a REM KFW junto ao governo do estado, pode trazer mais recursos, captar recursos, mais dar continuidade ao pagamento de bolsa e também formação dos agentes florestais. Precisamos ter mais agentes agroflorestais formados aqui no Acre.
O programa incentiva ainda a pecuária sustentável com o uso de áreas de pastagens degradadas.
É muito importante o apoio financeiro do Banco KFW junto ao programa REM, porque ele incentiva ao produtor a utilizar as suas áreas, aplicando os insumos que foram financiados e evitando maiores danos ambientais, evitar o desmatamento e sempre respeitando a legislação.
O programa REM é uma iniciativa da Alemanha e Reino Unido por meio do banco KFW, aos que assumem o compromisso de não desmatar, cuidar de sua biodiversidade e de suas populações. Acre, visão de futuro, governo de todos.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sarubidira Kutunarivu. I'm a social scientist from the University of Antananarivo, Madagascar. And I've spent much of the last decade researching the impacts of forest conservation on the lives of forest communities. I've done hundreds of interviews with people living on forest edge. And as we've seen in the video, these people are the ones that are most affected by forest conservation and also the most essential to ensuring that forest conservation is effective. But then their voices are often not heard in discussions such as this, so I'm really delighted to be chairing this session today. I'm especially delighted to see the prominence that the UK government is giving to this topic. This session, which draws upon the experiences of Indigenous peoples, local communities and civil society representatives from all over the world, is the very first event at the UK Pavilion and maybe one of the first events at all at COP26. So we'll be discussing the importance of social inclusion in forest management through REDD+. So REDD+, for those who are new to it, stands for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So it's a mechanism that aims to contribute to mitigating climate change by incentivizing tropical forest countries to conserve their forests. So today's event has three key aims. So first of all, we aim to provide a platform for novel voices to share their experiences and lessons learned. Second, we want to show appreciation and consideration for the valuable role of forest communities in protecting and managing biodiversity. And last but not least, we want to reflect on how mechanisms such as REDD+ have supported Indigenous people and local communities in the past. And we also, most importantly, explore how REDD+ can also have unintended consequences on the lives of forest communities. So we expect that today's discussion will send a strong message to governments here at COP that while REDD+ can have potential in conserving forests and mitigating climate change, it's really essential that we have a more meaningful participation and collaboration with Indigenous peoples and local communities. So to kickstart this panel discussion, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dolores de Jesus Cabnalcock, who's also known as Lola. And Lola is from Guatemala. She's the leader of the network of Indigenous women on biodiversity in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's also an Indigenous representative to the UN REDD Executive Board. So Lola, my first question for you is what do you see as the most effective ways of improving meaningful engagement with Indigenous and local communities and ensuring their participation? Over to you, Lola.
Muy buenos días, soy Lola Cabnal, una mujer maya Ekchi de una comunidad rural en Guatemala. Primero agradezco la oportunidad que me permite poder comunicar mis propias experiencias y sentimientos en relación al tema. Y como mujer indígena rural, también mi experiencia de vivir dentro de las... no sé si habrá traducción. ¿No hay traducción?
No translation.
¿No?
No English translation. No, it's Spanish.
¿No?
Okay, you
Yeah.
speak now.
¿Inicio?
Yeah, you speak again and
Okay.
we'll hear.
Muy buenos días. ¿Pues sí? Yeah.
No, it's in Spanish.
No, buenos días, soy Lola Cabnal. ¿No es Spanish? No?
No, it's in
Es English.
no English.
Buenos días.
Yeah.
Buenos días, soy Lola Cabnal.
One.
Yeah, it's one.
Ya. Buenos días, soy Lola Cabnal, maya Ekchi de una comunidad rural en Guatemala. Para mí es muy importante poder compartir con cada uno de ustedes mi propia experiencia de poder vivir en una comunidad y sobre todo en una comunidad declarada área protegidas, que es propiedad de los gobiernos. Durante muchos años mi comunidad le fue declarada área protegida sobre la comunidad, sobre los pueblos. Y esto pues no ha permitido un buen desarrollo sostenible para las comunidades, sobre todo para las mujeres indígenas. Por eso es muy importante poder compartir mi experiencia y cómo pueden los estados mejorar esta situación de cómo las comunidades pueden adoptar su propio mecanismo, sus propias formas de convivir con la madre naturaleza y fortalecer eso. Los gobiernos deben, en primer lugar, desarrollar acciones o un proceso de participación plena y efectiva con las comunidades, con los pueblos indígenas, para primero desarrollar esa participación para una mejor coordinación, para proteger los derechos colectivos de los pueblos indígenas y de las mujeres dentro de las comunidades rurales. Además de eso, proteger los derechos de la madre naturaleza. Cuando se habla de participación plena es porque estamos hablando de que las personas y los gobiernos deben de interactuar. Segundo, desarrollar un proceso de consulta y consentimiento previo, libre e informado para las personas cuando se desarrollan acciones en las comunidades. Se deberán también adoptar políticas y leyes que salvaguardan las formas propias de convivir con la madre naturaleza, las formas propias de las instituciones de los pueblos indígenas y de las mujeres en las comunidades, de las culturas y para nuestro medio ambiente. Los pueblos indígenas tienen el derecho en la libre determinación para el ejercicio libre de esos derechos de autonomía y de autogobierno. Eso es importante para los pueblos indígenas, para que podamos mejorar y contribuir en la sostenibilidad y el desarrollo y la conservación de la madre naturaleza. Cuando yo hablo de madre naturaleza, estoy hablando de los bosques, de los territorios, del agua y de la vida misma de las comunidades o de los pueblos indígenas de manera colectiva. También se deben fortalecer las capacidades de los pueblos indígenas a crear mesas de alto nivel en donde puedan tomar decisiones, realizar procesos de transparencia, crear mecanismos de participación con equidad de género intergeneracional. ¿Qué significa esto? Cuando hablamos de fortalecer las capacidades de los pueblos indígenas para que puedan tener la participación plena con equidad de género, no estamos hablando solamente de que mujeres y hombres pueden participar, sino que tanto gobiernos como pueblos indígenas, representantes de comunidades, de mujeres, puedan interactuar, desarrollar acciones que les permita a fortalecerse esas capacidades y que puedan formar parte en los procesos de negociación, en los procesos de cabildeo, de incidencia, y que sean ellos tomadores de decisión también, porque hemos dicho y hemos hablado, los pueblos indígenas no somos el problema, no somos los que destruimos, somos los que conservamos. Por lo tanto, si no me toman a mí la palabra para decidir qué debo de hacer sobre mi territorio, sobre mi bosque, sobre mi comunidad, y me están poniendo algo sobre mi taza de café que no me gusta, no voy a aceptarlo. Por lo tanto, voy a hacer como nosotros en Guatemala le llamamos berrinche, cuando no estamos aceptando algo que es impuesto por algo que no está reflejándose en mi cultura, mis consentimientos, mi pensamiento, mi vida misma. Entonces necesitamos esa participación plena y efectiva para poder garantizar esos derechos colectivos de los pueblos indígenas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lola, for that. So Lola, you touched on the importance of bridging the gaps between indigenous peoples and national governments. Next, we have Victoria Tolly Corpus, also known as Vicky, from the Philippines. She's also working on the very same topic. Vicky is an indigenous leader and activist, a strong advocate for women's rights. She's also the founder and executive director of TEPA, which is an indigenous peoples organization managing the World Bank Capacity Building Program for indigenous peoples on REDD+ in Asia Pacific. So, Vicky, you have been critical in advancing the rights of indigenous peoples and women in forest conservation initiatives such as REDD+. Can you share with us your experiences? How much have you achieved so far in your advocacy role, and what remains to be done? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, when we manage the FCPF capacity building on REDD+, that's a project of the World Bank. We covered several countries in Asia and in the Pacific. No, so we had Thailand, we had Cambodia, Bhutan, Laos, no, and in the Pacific we have Papua New Guinea and Fiji. And one of the things that we did as a first portion of the project is to really ask our colleagues to do a research on the state of the forests in their own communities and how far has REDD enabled them to protect their own forest as well as practice their own customary sustainable forest management. No, and the research was very interesting because all of the researchers have shown the various concepts that indigenous peoples have on forests, which is very different from the dominant concept, no? They said, for instance, among the Karens in Thailand, they said they have 4 kinds of forests. There is a male forest, a female forest, you know, and a forest where they are relying much more on to get building materials as well as food. In Cambodia, they have such a thing called a spirit forests, no, where they do the rituals. That is the place where they go and do the rituals to honor the spirits and the deities of the forests, as well as the water and all that. So there are very interesting concepts that you can see from the results of the research. And what this tells us is that this is knowledge, this is their own traditional knowledge and practices that is not known publicly. But because of the project, we managed to publish the publication. You can find this in our website, tubtuba.org. And you can see that, number one, it helped them make more visible and make more known the concept of forests as related to their lands, territories, and resources, as well as their culture and their spirituality. No, because that's really the key issue that indigenous peoples keep on bringing to the attention of states. Forests are not just to capture carbon. It's much more than that. So that's the first. The second thing is they also, because of REDD+, many governments who don't in fact recognize indigenous peoples in their countries, and they don't have laws, like in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Laos, there are no laws that recognize the rights of indigenous peoples. But because of REDD+, they came up with forest laws. They revised some of their forest laws to recognize, to somehow recognize these forest-dependent peoples, and that's the beginning of the conversation between these indigenous peoples and the state authorities, no? Because of course they received the funding for REDD+, and one of the requirements is they are able to include indigenous peoples in their in designing these REDD+ projects, and to discuss what policies should be in place. They made research on the existing policies, and there are many conflicting policies, no, at the country level. While there is this policy on REDD+, there are still policies to expand land concessions, for instance, in Cambodia, and to enter into forests to plant rubber, and other monocultures. And that was a subject of discussions. That is this consistent with the objectives for climate change, as well as, of course, REDD+ in particular. And then they also had a lot of the analysis of state policies, and finally they managed to have dialogues with the governments, and that's what brought about some of the changes in the laws and policies. So in summary, you can see that because of the existence of the REDD+ agreement, which we worked hard, Noor and I were one of the negotiators. I was the negotiator for the Philippine government, and we really fought hard to ensure that the safeguards for indigenous peoples are included in the REDD agreement, the final REDD agreements, because indigenous peoples have been coming in their numbers saying that if REDD+ will not include indigenous peoples, this will be failures. And I'm very happy to see now that there is such a thing. Of course, there are still a lot of challenges, no? Because it's always the conflict over land use, no? That if the government thinks that this forest should be converted to more, economic activities that bring more economic gains, then there is always that kind of conflict between them, and that has to be resolved. And the other thing, in some of these countries, there is also a shrinking democratic space, where indigenous peoples and civil society, their activities to protest or to participate are also curtailed. So those are just a few points that I would like to raise here.
Thank you very much, Vicky. So before we move on to the next topic, you talked about rights like recognizing local indigenous people's and local communities' rights to their land. You also touched on the importance of managing land conflicts. So let us turn now to Raymond. Raymond Samdong is the Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Manager from the Tenure Facility. So Raymond, we've been talking about the potential of role of REDD+ in conserving biodiversity and also mitigating climate change. But we talked about the challenges as well. Lola mentioned that Indigenous peoples are not a problem, and Vicky just emphasized that as well. So can you please tell us about how have rights such as land tenure and also rights to carbon for Indigenous people and local communities affected forest conservation efforts?
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful question, and I want to thank the other panelists for their presentation. If you have listened carefully, the first presenter from Guatemala already nailed it in her presentation that tenure is important. And Vicky has also added her voice on that same particular topic. This goes to tell us that tenure is a foundation and a precondition for development and for climate mitigation. Yeah, if you look around the studies that have been published, particularly the RRR publication, which is well cited, you see Indigenous people territory over the globe, just 15% has been recognized. And Indigenous people territory hosts the most valuable forests and biodiversity in our planet. And they have been the key guardian of protecting this. But yet, they have challenges in securing their territory. And just to illustrate, if you don't have own your house, you cannot better manage it. So when you own your house, you will take care of it. You will protect it for your generation. So this is just a clear example that the Indigenous people have been working very hard to secure this most valuable forest and biodiversity, but yet they are paying the cost because they don't have clear tenure. And clear tenure is the basis to who is responsible for reducing deforestation and who is eligible for REDD payment. You should remember that REDD Plus is an economic incentive, and incentivize those who protect the forest should be paid. So in this federal context, who are you going to pay? We see for example, in the Congo Basin where I conducted an extensive research on tenure, we see there is legal pluralism where you have customary tenure and statutory tenure. And these two different tenure they are parallel. And there's no harmonization. And it is very challenging on how you could be a better institutional arrangement on how to protect and manage the forest. Yeah, and to some extent, some government, because of this economic incentives, are re-centralizing tenure right from the community because they need to also get this economic incentive from REDD Plus finance. So community tenure is really critical. And if community tenure is secure and they have this better capacity, strengthened capacity, then they will better manage this forest, which is a nature-based solution for climate and biodiversity. So tenure is really a very important precondition. And if you look at some of the bigger biodiversity landscape, for example, in the Congo Basin, in Eastern Congo, you see there's a lot of conflict because of lack of clarified tenure. And if you look at the large, like in the Kaizi-Begwa, in the Virunga and all that, the communities that live within and around they've been exposed to human rights violation because their right has been denied. Their own livelihood is being threatened. And they are the key actors in protecting this landscape. So it is a very important time for politicians to listen to the voice of community and to develop a dedicated support and judicial legislative reform that can really secure this community right tenure for a better good for the planet.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond. That's so well said. You emphasize the critical role of clearer and more secure rights to land in ensuring that local communities actually benefit from REDD+. So following up on that, I'm coming back to you, Lola. And I want us to discuss the importance of social safeguards and also benefit sharing in ensuring that REDD+ is effective. So, Lola, what are your experiences of effective implementation of social safeguards and benefit sharing? How do you ensure that the money that is flowing from REDD+ is actually also reaching indigenous peoples and local communities? Thank you.
Gracias. Sí, yo como he mencionado y como también lo mencionó acá mi hermana y el hermano, creo que es tan importante primeramente reconocer los derechos de los pueblos indígenas a los recursos naturales, de sus propias formas de vivir, la espiritualidad, la cultura hacia los recursos naturales. Eso para que se pueda, en primer lugar, que los gobiernos, como ya lo mencioné, los gobiernos deben de adoptar medidas, deben de adoptar leyes, porque los beneficios no llegan directamente a las comunidades, como ya lo manifestaron nuestros hermanos, no llegan directamente, entonces debe de haber esa posibilidad, esa estrategia y esa acción para que los comunitarios, las y los comunitarios, los pueblos indígenas puedan ser beneficiarios directamente de estos beneficios que genera las estrategias, respetar y reconocer esos aportes de los pueblos indígenas en mantener la cultura, la espiritualidad, en mantener la conservación, es lo más importante. Eso deben de hacer primero para poder decir que sí las comunidades o los pueblos indígenas se están beneficiando directamente o indirectamente de los programas que llegan por el programa de REDD+. Y creemos de que, como dijo el hermano, REDD+ es una estrategia, es una herramienta, pero para que se pueda ver esa parte de fortalecer las capacidades sociales de las personas, es necesario de que se reconozcan esos derechos, de que se reconozcan y se respeten, como también desarrollar esos procesos de titulación de tierras. Porque en Guatemala, por ejemplo, con nuestra experiencia, la mayor parte del territorio nacional donde viven pueblos indígenas no están reconocidos y no están titulados. Es más bien, se mencionan declarar más áreas protegidas y ese no es la forma de garantizar los derechos de los pueblos indígenas, porque cuando se declara áreas protegidas se restringen derechos, se restringen desarrollo, se restringen participación plena y efectiva de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces no es eso salvaguardar, no estamos hablando de salvaguardias ambientales y sociales cuando estamos restringiendo derechos. Esto debe de haber participación. Si a mí se me declara área protegida en mi comunidad, debo de decidir si sí lo quiero o no lo quiero. Esa es una forma de poder garantizar esos derechos y la plena participación de los pueblos indígenas.
Yeah. Thank you, Lola. We've been talking a lot about the importance of rights, like recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. I know I want to turn to also the role of adequate finance in ensuring that this recognition is actually being done. So, Vicky, can you tell us what can be done to ensure that indigenous peoples and local communities groups inform the design and access to finance?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, here in the present CAP, for instance, I have been informed that there will be an announcement by some governments of really allocating, I think, 1.8 billion for forest, for the conservation of forests and the support for nature-based solutions. And I think that those kinds of finances will really have to look into mechanisms in which the indigenous peoples can have direct access to this finance. The data that came out so far in the researches say that, out of the millions of US dollars allocated for REDD all over in the countries where it is implemented, there is a data which says that only 5% of that amount has really gone to indigenous communities themselves. So first, I think the indigenous peoples have to be more proactive in terms of proposing to the states what kinds of mechanisms or institutions they can build so that they can they can receive the money and they can use this, and of course they have to account for it, and that's one capacity building that needs to be done, that indigenous peoples build their own capacities, they talk among themselves, and then they create those kinds of institutional mechanisms which will be able to receive these resources. In the past, resources always go to like big conservation organizations or big NGOs, and then only small amounts go to the communities, which is really not a good model. So that's first. And then, of course, secondly, it's not just simply about money. It's also really about the policy reforms. So some part of that money should really go to encourage governments to put into their policies the respect for and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples, but also for them to engage in more fruitful dialogue between themselves and indigenous people, so that the inclusion in designing the projects will really happen. There's still a long way to go, for governments to really genuinely and effectively engage with indigenous peoples. I know there are a few examples that are good, but in general, I think there's much improvement is needed. And then, of course, thirdly, the technologies. We know that there are now technologies that help indigenous peoples strengthen their assertion and their claims to their territories. And many of these technologies are easily available in the knowledge, like, for instance, mapping, the use of technologies to map more clearly what the indigenous territories are, resource inventories, as well as carbon accounting. We're talking about sharing of benefits, and benefits are not really shared in the best ways that we can think of. But if the indigenous peoples are able to do all that, then they will know exactly what are the resources, how much carbon are they sequestering, what kinds of arrangements can they establish between government and between themselves and other interested investors, for instance, so that they will be able to get the money that they will need, not just for protecting the forest, but in really strengthening their own communities, their governance systems, because they have their own customary laws and governance systems regarding forests. And to get this support for them to be able to contribute even further. There are already data which show that indigenous peoples have contributed very much to carbon sequestration all over the world. So why shouldn't we enhance that capacity, stop criminalizing them or arresting them, and support them so that they will be able to continue contributing to solving the problems that we're facing now.
Thank you so much, Vicky. I think what you said is so spot on, that it's not only about the money, it's about the policy reforms and ensure that the voices of local forest communities are being heard. So we have a few more minutes. We're going to open the floor to the audience now, if you have any questions. Yes? So I will need to repeat your question, for the virtual people.
So in a more positive side of things, what are good practices between governments and Indigenous people that are going on today?
Okay, so our audience question is, what practically the relationships between governments and local people? Is that what you are asking?
What are some good examples?
Good examples, like good practices. Yeah. So I'm turning to Raymond.
Yeah, this is a very good question because, as Vicky said, you need good, stronger alliance. You need good collaboration, dialogue. If you look at the tenure facility projects and support, we have quite clear example where civil society, indigenous-based organizations have reached a very good dialogue and good relationship with the government. For example, in Panama, our partner CONAPIP.
Oh, I'm from Panama.
Yeah, Panama. Yeah, our partner CONAPIP has reached a very good working relationship with the Ministry of Environment, which has never happened before. They were in sort of conflict. But because of the dedicated support and breaching of funds and building the capacity, they were able to sit in political negotiation and talk with the government. And recently, the Ministry of Environment in Panama has approved the indigenous people to secure the land in protected areas in the Nassau. This was part of the tenure facility support. In Liberia, during the Land Right Act of 2014, the civil society organization and tenure facility support are able to work with the Liberia Land Authority to develop the self-identification protocol, which is the first step in the process of formalization of customary land right in Liberia. Yeah, I can also give you an example in Mali, where we work with the agricultural land reform for food security. The government has been very strong and very willing. You know, the government is the duty bearer, is the guarantor of right. You cannot secure right without the government. So these two are very important. We've passed the age where it is about conflict, naming, shaming. We are now at a stage where we need to act. We need to bring them to the table to talk, because these two different right holders, they have a role to play for climate mitigation. So it is a convergence and not a divergence now. Thank you.
Yes, we have time for two more questions, and I also want to give the speech to the floor to our new friend. Yes, please. Yeah, at the back. Sorry, can you speak up, please? We cannot really hear you.
The translation should go near him because there's no mic. Okay.
Yeah.
Mi pregunta es si conocen los procedimientos o los requisitos para aprobación de los proyectos REDD Plus y cuáles son los requisitos que deben de tener las comunidades para aplicar a esos proyectos.
No. Can someone translate that?
Translated.
Yeah. No one? Yeah.
What are the requirements?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. What are the requirements for the application? Oh, you got it. Yeah. Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, what are the requirements for approving REDD Plus projects? So I'm turning to our new friend Tuntiak Katan from Ecuador. So Tuntiak is the vice coordinator of the Coordination of Indigenous Organizations in the Amazon Basin. So Tuntiak, can you please tell us a few words about that question? You can just speak. Someone will translate.
La pregunta que hizo el señor relacionado a eso. Bueno, yo vengo trabajando en diferentes iniciativas en proceso de REDD+, tanto desde su momento de creación y cuando hace 10 años o 12 años atrás se empezaron a construir los procesos de Red Más y en realidad lo que nosotros propusimos como organizaciones de la cuenca amazónica era que Red Más no solamente se enfoque en términos de carbono, términos de conservación, sino vaya más allá de eso en términos de gestión holística territorial y por supuesto desde COICA en su momento nosotros propusimos Red Indígena Amazónico, que iba más allá de carbono basado en los derechos territoriales, inclusive en todo lo que es el contexto territorial. Inclusive en 2018, si no me acuerdo, 2019, participamos en la evaluación de 10 años de Red Más que se hizo en Alemania, en Wilbur, donde se propuso igualmente que los proyectos Red Más se enfoquen a movilizar recursos, tanto humanos, técnicos, tecnológicos y financieros, hacia el fortalecimiento de propios procesos de las comunidades indígenas y locales.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chunchak. So since we are almost out of time, I'd like to invite each of you in less than 30 seconds each to summarize in one sentence the one top priority for the future of REDD+. So I'll start with myself. So I'm going to talk from the perspectives of, like being a social scientist or researcher. And I mostly want to speak to my fellow academics here. I think we need to reflect on what the purpose of our research, if we do not see it being used, and go the extra mile of informing policy. So my one-sentence summary is engaging with decision makers to support evidence-based policy making is unusual, and it can be very frustrating at times, very challenging, but we need more of it. So over to you, Vicky. What's your one-sentence summary of top priority?
Well, I think the top priority really for indigenous peoples, not just in REDD, but in the COP that's happening now, is to ensure that in many of the decisions being taken, whether this is in Article 6, on market and non-market-based approaches, safe environmental and social safeguards have to be put in place to ensure that indigenous peoples are included in designing those projects that the governments are going to undertake, as well as in deciding how the finances should be used. So the human rights of indigenous peoples, and which the human rights approach to all these measures is really crucial for the success of all these actions taken in relation to climate.
Thank you, Vicky. Lola.
Para mí debe de ser con participación plena y efectiva un programa, que los programas nacionales de REDD Plus debe de ser incluyente, participativo y que donde los pueblos indígenas puedan tener acceso a esos beneficios, tanto desde los fondos como los beneficios desde las comunidades.
Thank you, Lola. Next we have Raymond.
Yeah, for me, I would think the most important, which is really crucial now, is more dedicated funding and capacity support for indigenous people to secure their land, to strive to protect the forest more. This dedicated funding needs to also help them to strengthen their governance system, more innovations for them to map and protect their land against vested interests is really important. There's a need of more support. I think today, what we'll be hearing, we want to hear how much the governments are committed and dedicated direct funding to indigenous people and indigenous organizations. Yeah.
Thank you, Raymond. And last we have Chunchak.
Se debería de crear fondos dedicados para pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. Además de ser este red a nivel global, crear a nivel nacional, como en mi país, en Ecuador, estamos ya implementando la red indígena amazónico. También entiendo que en Perú ya está aceptado constitucionalmente el tema de red indígena amazónico, y en Ecuador, en el plan nacional, está contemplado. Entonces eso significa dar voz, dar más derechos a los pueblos que son tenedores de bosques. Y finalmente, lo que creo que es más importante es que REDD no solamente se enfoque en áreas deforestadas o degradadas, sino que también se enfoque en áreas preservadas, porque si no a veces se convierte como un incentivo perverso cuando nos enfocamos solamente a áreas deforestadas y degradadas y dejamos sin apoyo tanto político y financiero a áreas que están preservadas por pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Tontiak. So our session has come to an end, and let's give a big applause to our four panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you.